Welcome to the UPSC News Analysis for 9th June 2025. This deep dive breaks down key current affairs, explains basic concepts, and highlights Maine's relevant issues, all tailored for UPSC aspirants. We're going to discuss every topic from the source material, keeping the ascent more Indian, focusing on the context and implications right here at home.
Exactly.
Today we're exploring, quite a range of crucial developments shaping India. We're looking at everything from the ground realities of ethnic conflict and natural disasters to shifts in governance, international diplomacy, and even how climate and technology intersect.
Yeah, it's a lot to cover.
It is, but we'll try and make sense of it together.
Absolutely. You should think of these as pieces of a larger puzzle, really, about how India functions, both, internally and on the world stage. Understanding the links between these events, even if they seem separate, that's really key for a deeper preparation.
Okay, let's start with a situation that remains incredibly challenging, Manipur. The news is that tensions have flared up again after the arrest of a mighty leader.
That's right. And to really get what's happening, you have to remember Manipur's, complex ethnic layout. You've got the Meiteis primarily in the valley areas.
Right.
Well, the Kukis and Nagas are mostly in the surrounding hills. This kind of geographic and demographic split, it's really at the heart of the ongoing ethnic clashes.
Which tragically started back in May 2023.
Exactly, May 2023, and have claimed, sadly, over 250 lives since then. It's grim.
And amidst all this, certain groups have become quite prominent. Arambai Tengal is a name that keeps coming up, isn't it?
It does. They are described in the sources as a radical armed Meitei group. They've been accused of engaging in vigilante actions and, frankly, contributing to the violence.
Now, something procedural caught my eye, the reference to Section 163 of the Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, the BNSS.
Ah, yes.
That's the new framework for prohibitory orders, right? Replacing the old Section 144.
Precisely. It replaces the old Section 144 under the CRPC. It's an important detail because it shows the implementation of the new criminal laws. It's the legal tool authorities use to restrict movement or assembly when they feel it's needed for public order.
And we should remember the state's been under president's rule since February 2025, Article 356.
Yes, that reflects just how severe the governance crisis has become. Plus, you have the CBI and NIA actively probing the violence. That's happening under directions from the Supreme Court, and some trials have even been moved to Guwahati.
So on June 8th specifically, what was the immediate trigger? What set off this fresh wave of violence?
Well, the news reports point to the arrest by the CBI of an Arambai Tengal leader. This individual was apparently linked to the earlier violence back in 2023.
Then the response. Pretty swift, it seems. Internet and mobile data services suspended across 5 districts in the Imphal Valley.
Yes, citing that BNSS Section 163. It's a measure they often resort to, though it always brings up those difficult questions about balancing security needs with, essential communication access.
Especially in a crisis.
Exactly. And the clashes that followed the arrest and these security measures, they led to injuries and, unfortunately, damage to public property.
There were other things happening too, right? The NIA made arrests as well.
That's right. 3 insurgents linked to an attack back in January 2024 and more. And you also had state MLAs meeting the governor, protests erupting, even threats of self-immolation, which just shows the sheer desperation.
It really underlines how volatile the situation still is.
It truly highlights that even with President's rule in place since February, the underlying tensions, the active conflict, it hasn't gone away. The state remains incredibly fragile.
What about government efforts to manage this? We've heard about peace talks, but they seem to have had limited results.
That's fair to say. The government, both state and central, has definitely been involved. There have been peace talks, yes, but getting a real breakthrough has been very difficult, given how deep the divisions run.
Security deployment has been heavy, I assume?
Oh, significant. Army, Assam Rifles, CAPFs are on the ground. And as we mentioned, ban orders, curfews under Section 163 BNSS are frequent tools. There have also been efforts, led by the Tribal Affairs Ministry and the Home Ministry, focused on dialogue and, crucially, rehabilitation for those displaced by the violence.
Okay, pulling back a bit now, how do we connect all this to the bigger picture, specifically for your mains preparation? What are the core issues, the challenges that Manipur lays bare?
Well, first off, it's a really stark example of a deep-rooted ethnic divide, and maybe a failure to integrate communities effectively over the long term. It also shows the dangerous role that militant and, frankly, radical groups can play in fueling and sustaining violence.
And the impact on trust.
Huge. A major consequence is the severe erosion of public trust in state institutions. The administration, the security forces, people just don't trust them in many areas.
And the communication blackouts.
While they're framed as security measures, they undeniably raise critical questions about fundamental rights. Access to information, communication, it's vital. And fundamentally, you're looking at a massive humanitarian crisis. Displacement, trauma, and basically a paralysis of effective governance in parts of the state.
Ripple effects must be widespread.
Absolutely, on society. You see the seeds of inter-community hatred taking deep root, mass displacement tearing communities apart, and significant psychosocial trauma for countless people. Politically, it severely questions the credibility, the effectiveness of the state government. And even president's rule itself seems unable to solve the core problem.
And the economy.
Crippled. The disruption is immense. It just paralyzes the local economy, trade, services, everything suffers.
It really does bring up those tough governance and ethics questions too, doesn't it?
Without a doubt. It's a severe test of the rule of law in a conflict zone. It highlights the vulnerabilities concerning the rights of minorities in situations like this. And you have this profound ethical dilemma. How do you weigh state security needs, like shutting down the internet, against basic human rights and the need for people to communicate, especially during a crisis?
So looking ahead, what are some potential steps? What's the way forward suggested by the sources?
Well, the urgent need that's highlighted is for an inclusive peace dialogue. Getting all stakeholders, the Mighties, the Kukizos, civil society groups around the table in a meaningful way, that's paramount.
And dealing with the extremist groups.
Yes, there needs to be a decisive crackdown on groups like Arambai Tengal and other armed vigilante outfits. You can't have parallel armed groups operating. Also, accelerating the rehabilitation and confidence-building measures for the thousands displaced, that's critical for any kind of stability.
Justice needs to be seen to be done too.
Absolutely. Transparent CBI and NIA investigations are crucial, not just for accountability, but to avoid any perception of bias and rebuild some trust in the judicial process. Supporting grassroots peace builders, neutral observers on the ground that could also help.
And the effectiveness of president's rule.
That's a big question this situation forces us to ask. How effective is it in resolving such deep-seated conflicts? How can center-state governance be more collaborative, more enabling in these crises?
Ultimately, it sounds like the path forward requires a real long-term commitment, promoting development, ensuring genuinely inclusive governance, and upholding constitutional safeguards for all communities. A very complex, challenging situation indeed.
Moving from those internal challenges now, let's shift focus to India's external positioning. EAMS Jaishankar's recent strategic visit to France and Belgium is worth looking at.
Right. India's ties with Europe, especially the EU, have definitely deepened. We've had a strategic partnership since, 2004?
That's right, 2004. And a major point of engagement, maybe the biggest economic one, remains the India-EU Free Trade Agreement negotiations. These have been going on for a long, long time, since 2007.
But they saw a revival recently.
Yes, a significant revival in 2022. So there's momentum there, or at least an attempt at it.
We've also heard a lot about IMES, the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. It's often framed as a potential alternative trade route, maybe distinct from China's Belt and Road Initiative.
IMF is certainly a significant initiative, yes. India is quite keen to push it forward. And another vital area is counterterrorism cooperation. This was highlighted recently by India's Operation Sindoor in May 2025, which targeted cross-border terrorist leadership.
And the choice of France and Belgium for this particular visit seems quite strategic. France is a key defense partner. We think of the Rafale deal, our Indo-Pacific cooperation.
Exactly. France is a real pillar in India's European engagement. And Belgium is crucial because it hosts the EU headquarters itself in Brussels.
So engaging with Brussels is key for influencing broader EU policy.
Precisely. Trade policy, global governance stances, it all happens there.
So the news on June 8th was the start of this visit. What were the stated goals? What was on the agenda?
The objectives were pretty clear. Pushing forward those India-EU FTA talks, that was key. Discussing progress on IM, deepening counterterrorism cooperation, especially, in light of Operation Sindoor, and strengthening Indo-Pacific strategic cooperation. Meetings with the French foreign minister and key EU leaders in Brussels were planned.
And this visit built on a history of initiatives, right? The FTA talks got that fresh push after the 2022 leaders meeting.
Correct. And IMS, announced at the G20 summit India hosted in 2023, has crucial backing from the US, the EU, and India. Operation Sindoor, as we said, underscores India's evolving counterterrorism posture.
The India-France strategic partnership itself is very broad: defense, space, nuclear energy.
Absolutely. Rafale, Scorpene submarines, cooperation in space, nuclear energy, these are key pillars. And don't forget, the EU-India Connectivity Partnership launched in 2021. That ties into physical and digital infrastructure links. Plus, India's expanding Indo-Pacific policy finds a lot of common ground with France's own strategy in that vital region.
Okay, let's link this back to Maine's preparation. What are the core issues, the challenges, when we look at India's engagement with France, Belgium, and the EU, highlighted by this visit?
Well, the FTA negotiations themselves are complex. The EU has its concerns, labor standards, environmental rules. India has its own sensitivities, things like data localization, mobility for Indian professionals. It's tough.
And global tensions don't help.
Not at all. The Ukraine war, China's assertiveness, these things cast a shadow and complicate delicate negotiations. There's also the challenge of building deeper trust for sharing intelligence and data in counterterrorism efforts. That requires a high level of confidence. And within the EU, India needs to skillfully balance its relationships, particularly between major players like France and Germany.
What about the potential upsides, the impacts of these relationships, and a successful visit?
Well, for society, a good FTA could mean easier processes for Indian students and professionals wanting to study or work in Europe. That's a big plus. Economically, it holds the promise of boosting Indian exports, giving better market access for our goods and services in a huge market. Politically, strengthening ties with key EU nations like France and the EU as a whole definitely enhances India's diplomatic leverage on the global stage.
So what's a constructive way forward for India in cultivating these key relationships?
India probably needs to work on building stronger consensus within the EU for a balanced FTA, one that respects India's development needs and sensitivities. Leveraging France's strong support for IMC is crucial to get that corridor up and running quickly.
And counterterrorism.
Institutionalizing that dialogue is important at multiple levels with France, Belgium, the EU itself. Deepening cooperation in critical technologies, AI, space, semiconductors, that's vital for future collaboration. Promoting people-to-people ties like student exchanges and cultural programs builds a stronger foundation over time. And India can definitely use the experience and goodwill from its G20 presidency to position itself as a kind of bridge, between the global north and south within European forums.
Moving from diplomacy in Europe to the ongoing conflict there, the grim news continues from the Ukraine war, specifically about Russian forces advancing into a key Ukrainian industrial hub.
Yes, the war started by Russia's invasion in February 2022 just grinds on. Russia currently occupies roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory, including Crimea and parts of the Donbas region in the east.
And this Dnipropetrovsk region, mentioned in the news, it's particularly significant, isn't it? Ukraine's industrial heartland.
Exactly. Crucial for things like steel production, energy. The war's impact, of course, extends far beyond the battlefield. Major disruptions to global grain trade, volatile energy markets, significant geopolitical instability worldwide. It affects everyone.
India's position has been one of, careful balance. Neutral diplomacy calls for dialogue and peace.
While also continuing significant imports of Russian oil, often at discounted prices, despite Western sanctions. It's a balancing act.
So the news from June 8th.
It confirmed reports of Russian forces advancing into Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk region, capturing several towns. Heavy fighting reported, particularly around Nikopol and Kryvyi Rih.
And the strategic objective seems to be crippling Ukraine's industrial capacity.
That appears to be a primary goal of this offensive, yes. Internationally, the reaction was predictable. Western nations condemned it, fresh sanctions proposed. Ukraine, in response, has reiterated its urgent request for more air defense systems from the EU and the US.
How has India navigated this on the international stage? What have been the government's actions?
India's stance has been pretty consistent. Calls for respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity for all states, urging both sides back to dialogue and diplomacy. Notably, India has abstained on key UN votes related to the conflict, signaling its non-aligned approach.
And the oil trade continues.
Yes, that continuation of oil trade with Russia clearly shows India prioritizing its energy security, balancing it against international pressure.
India's G20 presidency in 2023 also focused on mitigating the global economic fallout from the war, didn't it?
It did. A key focus was preventing the war from making global economic vulnerabilities worse, especially regarding food and energy prices. India has also made efforts to diversify its grain import sources after the Black Sea grain deal disruptions. Fundamentally, India keeps trying to maintain balanced diplomatic engagement with both Russia, a historical partner, and the West, where ties are growing rapidly.
Okay, for Maine's preparation, what are the key issues and challenges this ongoing war presents for India?
Well, the most serious global concern is always the risk of escalation, potentially even involving nuclear weapons. For India specifically, the war directly impacts global food and energy security that hits our import bills. Inflation. It's a major test of India's strategic autonomy. Can we maintain our independent foreign policy under competing pressures? And it definitely puts pressure on India's careful diplomatic balancing act between different international partners.
And the impacts, how does it affect us?
Economically, volatile global oil prices significantly affect India's import bill and domestic inflation. Fluctuations in global food prices can risk both our agri-exports and the cost of any needed imports. Politically, India's neutral stance is constantly under scrutiny from various international blocs. Our handling of this crisis tests India's leadership potential, especially among global South nations. Socially, there's always that background concern about needing to evacuate Indian citizens, like students, if things get much worse.
So, how might India continue to navigate this tricky geopolitical landscape? What's the likely path forward?
India should probably continue to consistently advocate for a peaceful resolution through dialogue. Protecting India's core strategic interest is vital, especially energy security and secure trade routes. Supporting humanitarian aid channels, often via the UN, remains important. Diversifying our energy and food supply chains is a practical step to reduce risks from global disruptions. India also needs to keep articulating and strengthening its strategic autonomy narrative in multilateral forums. And given India's unique position, having reasonably good relations with both Russia and the West, there might be, however challenging, subtle opportunities to promote ceasefire diplomacy when possible.
Right, let's shift focus back to domestic governance now. There are some interesting developments in Assam concerning draft Waqf rules.
Okay, first, a quick reminder. Waqf refers to religious endowments in Islam. Property or assets donated for religious or charitable purposes. It's governed by the Waqf Act of 1995, which was amended back in 2013.
And these properties are managed by state waqf boards, right? Constitutionally, it's a state subject.
Correct. And collectors, or district magistrates, are the senior administrative heads in districts, holding significant executive power. Now, disputes over Waqf properties, historically, they've often led to legal battles and sometimes, unfortunately, communal tensions.
So the news is the Assam government has released draft Waqf rules under that 1995 act. What's the key provision causing discussion?
The most significant change proposed in these draft rules is giving collectors greater powers, specifically to verify Waqf assets and supervise compliance regarding their management.
Which is a notable shift because previously the state Waqf board had the main supervisory role.
Exactly. This proposed expansion of the collector's powers has, perhaps predictably, led to concerns from some Muslim groups. They worry it could mean more state interference and maybe impact the autonomy of Waqf management.
And the government's justification.
The Assam government states the aim is simply to improve transparency and accountability in managing these often valuable properties.
This move by Assam, it seems to fit into a broader national focus on Waqf properties, doesn't it?
Yes, there has been a national push for better management and transparency. Remember the Waqf Property Management System, Waqf PMIS, that was launched. And the digitization of over 8 lakh Waqf properties across India is an ongoing effort monitored by the Ministry of Minority Affairs to try and curb misuse and encroachment.
Constitutionally, it's interesting. Article 26 guarantees freedom to manage religious affairs.
But subjects like charitable institutions and religious endowments are actually on the concurrent list, entry 28, meaning both the center and states can legislate.
And the 2013 amendment to the act had already tried to strengthen management.
It did. That amendment actually enhanced the powers of Waqf boards and brought in stricter penalties for encroachment. So Assam's draft rules are proposing a new layer of oversight, bringing the district administration more directly into the picture.
Okay, connecting this to Maine's prep. What are the key issues and challenges raised by these proposed rules?
Well, it clearly highlights that tension between state regulatory control and the constitutionally protected autonomy of minority religious institutions under Article 26. There's always a risk of politicization when managing Waqf properties, which can be very valuable assets.
And the existing problem.
Huge issue with judicial pendency in resolving Waqf land disputes. Thousands of cases are stuck. The involvement of land mafias. The persistent challenge of preventing illegal encroachments. These are major problems this move perhaps tries to address, though maybe controversially.
What about the potential impacts?
Politically, it feeds into the ongoing federalism debate, the balance of power between center and state, especially on religious endowments. Socially, some minority groups have voiced concerns about potential erosion of their rights to manage their religious affairs. From a governance perspective, if implemented well and transparently, it could potentially improve land records accuracy and accountability. But the risk of misuse is definitely there too.
So what would be a constructive way forward in developing these rules? How can they balance these concerns?
Crucially, the process needs to be consultative, involving the state WACF board, community stakeholders, addressing their concerns, building trust that's essential. Developing very clear standard operating procedures, SOPs, for how collectors intervene is necessary to prevent arbitrary actions.
And protecting rights.
The rules must be framed to clearly safeguard minority rights under Article 26 while genuinely aiming for better governance. Accelerating digitization and promoting transparency in WAF property records is vital, regardless of who supervises. Judicial reforms to speed up WAF land dispute resolution are desperately needed. And maybe most importantly, preventing any political misuse of these rules is critical for maintaining social harmony.
Another recurring challenge in Assam, also back in the news, is the annual flood situation. The positive update is some improvement, but sadly, the death toll hit 26 in this recent wave.
Yes, Assam faces annual floods almost as a geographical certainty. It's largely due to the Brahmaputra River and its tributaries overflowing during the heavy southwest monsoon, rains from June to September. And factors like riverbank erosion, deforestation in catchment areas, and siltation in the riverbed just make the problem worse every year.
The Assam State Disaster Management Authority, ASDMA, is the key agency on the ground, coordinating the response. It's unfortunately a recurring disaster affecting lakhs of people annually.
The news reports on June 8th indicated floodwaters had started receding in some parts. However, this wave tragically resulted in 26 deaths, and over 7 lakh people were affected across 17 districts. Areas like Barpeta, Nagaon, Hojai were reportedly the worst hit.
And the damage isn't just lives, significant damage to infrastructure, crops, livestock.
Yes, the economic and social cost is always high. The immediate response involves setting up relief camps, deploying mobile medical units. The government is actively monitoring rain forecasts because more showers are expected, and the situation could change again.
The state government, led by ASDMA, has a standard set of initiatives for flood response, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Pre-positioning NDRF and SDRF teams, using forecast-based action systems based on IMD alerts to guide evacuations, setting up flood shelters, providing free rations, organizing health camps. These are standard procedures. Nationally, the framework comes from the National Policy on Disaster Management, NPDM, 2009.
What about longer-term measures? Anything being done for flood management beyond immediate relief?
Well, bodies like the Brahmaputra Board, under the Ministry of Jal Shakti, are supposed to work on flood moderation projects. Concepts like a Northeast Water Management Authority, NUWMA, have been considered. Technology is playing a bigger role too, satellite-based mapping for monitoring and assessment. Constitutionally, disaster management is on the concurrent list, entry 23.
Looking at this through the mains lens, what are the persistent issues and challenges in flood management in Assam? Why does this keep happening on such a scale?
A major challenge is the historical reliance on structural measures like embankments, which often prove inadequate or are poorly maintained. Non-structural measures like better forecasting, stricter land use regulation in floodplains need significant strengthening. Deforestation upstream, combined with climate change, is undeniably increasing the intensity and frequency of these extreme rainfall events. There are also institutional capacity gaps in real-time response and huge challenges in the complex task of rehabilitating displaced people and restoring their livelihoods long-term.
And the impacts are just devastating across the board.
They really are, socially. Displacement, health risks from waterborne diseases, significant trauma, economically, huge crop losses, livestock deaths, damage to vital infrastructure year after year. Politically, the government's flood management effectiveness is always a subject of intense debate. Environmentally, loss of biodiversity, changes to the river's course and shape.
So what's the way forward? How can Assam improve its resilience and management?
Strengthening those forecast-based action systems is key, using AI, better satellite data for more accurate, timely alerts. There needs to be a strategic shift, moving away from just focusing on embankments towards integrated river basin management that looks at the whole ecosystem.
Natural solutions.
Yes, promoting natural solutions like restoring wetlands and protecting natural floodplains. These act as crucial buffers. Encouraging climate-resilient agriculture practices in flood-prone areas is necessary to protect livelihoods. Institutionally, maybe accelerating the work of the Brahmaputra Board, expediting bodies like NUWMA, if deemed effective. Long-term planning must include robust post-flood rehabilitation programs focused on helping people rebuild lives and livelihoods. And finally, building capacity within local communities for preparedness and immediate response is absolutely critical.
Okay, let's move now to international trade. Focusing on the ongoing India-U.S. trade talks and a specific point of contention protecting Indian farmers.
Right. India-U.S. bilateral trade is huge, over $200 billion in 2024. It's a critical economic relationship. But there are always key issues under discussion: agriculture market access, tariffs, services, digital trade.
And the U.S. side consistently pushes for greater access to the Indian market for its farm products, right? Lower tariffs on things like almonds, dairy, pulses.
That's a standard U.S. ask. From India's side, the major concerns revolve around protecting the interests of our vast population of small and marginal farmers, and also addressing non-tariff barriers like complex sanitary and phytosanitary (SPS) standards that Indian agri-exports, think basmati rice, spices, face in the U.S. market.
And India also takes a strong stance at the WTO on food security, public stockholding rights.
Absolutely. Championing those issues for developing countries. That whole context definitely influences the bilateral talks.
So the news highlights that in the current talks, India's priority is firmly on shielding its domestic farmers from potentially disruptive, cheaper U.S. imports.
That seems to be the red line. The U.S. is indeed pushing hard for greater access for its dairy, poultry, almond producers. But India is resisting this, specifically, the sources say, to safeguard domestic livelihoods and protect our traditional agricultural systems, which are so deeply linked to rural employment and culture.
But India is also using these talks to push its own agenda.
Yes, seeking better market access in the U.S. for high-value Indian products like basmati rice, spices, organic produce. These discussions are often seen as steps, potentially, towards a broader India-U.S. free trade agreement, FTA, or maybe a smaller mini-trade deal.
And India's negotiating stance here seems aligned with its domestic policies.
Very much so. Things like the National Food Security Act, 2013, the support for the minimum support price MSP regime, policies to boost agri-exports like the Agri-Export Policy 2018, they all feed into this position.
And India's WTO advocacy, leading the G33 on public stockholding, seeking a permanent solution that gives leverage.
It provides consistency and leverage, yes. These bilateral talks happen mainly under the Trade Policy Forum, TPF framework, revived in 2021, involving ministerial-level meetings led by India's Commerce Ministry.
Okay, Maine's relevance. What are the main issues and challenges in these India-U.S. trade talks, specifically regarding agriculture?
Well, the U.S. pressure on Indian dairy and poultry markets is seen as a direct potential threat to rural livelihoods here. The high SPS standards in the U.S. act as significant non-tariff barriers, making it tough for many Indian exports. There are sensitive talks around intellectual property rights, IPR, especially for seeds and plant varieties. The fundamental challenge for India is balancing its commitment to domestic food security and farmer welfare with the pressures and potential benefits of trade liberalization.
What about the impact whichever way these talks go?
Economically, potential gains for India from increased exports of high-value products, but also risks that an influx of cheaper imports could really hurt small and marginal farmers. Socially, concerns about threats to indigenous breeds, maybe organic farming systems. Politically, farmer issues are incredibly sensitive in India, a major electoral consideration. And ethically, there's a clear concern about equity protecting the most vulnerable, the small farmers in globalized markets, you see.
Yes. So what might be a prudent way forward for India in these negotiations?
Perhaps a calibrated strategic approach. Opening up selectively where Indian farmers are competitive while protecting vulnerable sectors using mechanisms like tariff rate quotas, TRQs, to limit import volumes. Strengthening Indian agri-value chains is crucial for high-end export competitiveness. Negotiating equivalence agreements on SPS standards could ease barriers significantly. India must continue strong advocacy for a permanent solution on public stockholding at the WTO. Promoting India's unique organic GI-tagged traditional products abroad is also key. Ultimately, it's about skillfully balancing national interest, especially farmers, with the broader goal of a deeper India-U.S. strategic partnership.
Okay, let's turn to another state-level governance matter, this time from Goa. The chief minister recently overruled an order issued by his health minister.
Right. This incident touches upon some fundamental principles of cabinet functioning. Collective responsibility under Article 110.4.2a. The idea that the Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the Legislative Assembly.
And the CM's role is key there.
Absolutely. The chief minister heads the Council of Ministers. They have the authority, and often the need, to override individual ministers to maintain cabinet discipline, policy coherence, and administrative propriety.
This also brings in ethics and governance, doesn't it? Decisions affecting public servants need due process, transparency.
And avoiding arbitrariness.
Mhm.
Exactly. Maintaining the dignity of public servants while ensuring accountability. It's a delicate balance.
So the news was Goa CM Pramod Sawant publicly overruled his health minister, Vishwajit Ryan, about the suspension of the Goa Medical College dean.
That's right. The issue was the health minister ordered the suspension over alleged operational lapses. But significantly, this was announced publicly, even on social media, apparently bypassing established administrative procedures.
And the CM stepped in.
Yes, overruled the suspension order, reinstated the dean, and, importantly, stressed the need for procedural fairness and proper internal coordination within the government before taking such actions.
Predictably, the opposition criticized this.
Yes, they labeled it as administrative chaos or lack of coordination within the government.
This incident really highlights the importance of following established guidelines, doesn't it?
It does. For suspending senior officers, there are DOPT guidelines, rules like the All India Services Discipline and Appeal Rules. The Central Civil Services Conduct Rules also apply. Principles often mentioned around Good Governance Day, transparent, rule-bound governance, protecting civil servants' dignity while ensuring accountability are very relevant here.
And it connects to broader ethical principles from, say, the second ARC report's codes of conduct for ministers.
Principles like responsibility, fairness, rule of law. Exactly.
Yeah.
For mains prep, this incident exemplifies several critical issues. Ministerial overreach into service matters where procedures exist. The dangers of using social media for official administrative actions, it undermines institutional processes.
And the impact on morale.
Can significantly erode bureaucratic morale if officers feel vulnerable to arbitrary decisions. Overall, it points to potential weaknesses in enforcing cabinet norms and conduct codes.
What are the broader impacts of such incidents?
On governance, it can set a bad precedent for bypassing procedures, potentially undermining institutional integrity.
Huh.
Socially, when the public sees such disputes and apparent rule bending, it can erode trust in the rule of law. Politically, it might reflect underlying tensions in a coalition or perhaps a personality-driven governance style. Ethically, it raises clear questions about due process, fair hearing, and professional dignity.
How can such situations be better managed or prevented?
Well, ensuring strict adherence to established disciplinary procedures for public servants seems paramount. Rules are there for a reason. The CM's leadership is crucial in institutionalizing cabinet discipline and coordination. Ministers should probably avoid making administrative decisions a public spectacle on social media. Maybe some training for ministers on administrative law and ethical governance could help. Promoting a culture of consultation within government before big decisions are announced is vital, and strengthening internal grievance redressal within services might help resolve issues before they escalate publicly.
Okay, let's look at another state governance development. The recent cabinet expansion in Telangana.
Right. Cabinet formation at the state level. Article 164 outlines the appointment of the CM and other ministers by the governor.
And there's that size limit from the 91st Amendment.
Yes, the 91st Constitutional Amendment Act, 2003, limits the cabinet to 15% of the total MLAs, with a minimum of 12 for smaller states.
An important aspect in India, though not constitutionally mandated for cabinets, is representation trying to include members from SCs, STs, OBCs, minorities, women. It's seen as key for inclusive governance.
And that power sits squarely within the federal structure. State governments have autonomy here.
So the news on June 8th was Telangana CM Revanth Reddy expanded his cabinet. First time in 18 months, apparently.
Yes, inducted 5 new ministers. And the report specifically highlighted a focus on increasing scheduled caste SC representation.
This came after some pressure.
It seems so. Pressure from Congress party factions and, importantly, from SC community leaders who are demanding more representation in the state cabinet.
With these additions, the cabinet size is now 16, including the CM.
And the expansion has significant political weight. It's seen as a strategic move by the CM consolidating support, addressing representation demands before upcoming local body elections, and trying to balance regional and social representation across Telangana.
Constitutionally, the size limit is Article 164(1)A.
Correct. And beyond that limit, political conventions heavily influence cabinet formation. Parties aim for a composition reflecting the state's social diversity electoral base. While reservation exists in legislatures for SC/ST/OBC, their inclusion in the Council of Ministers is typically left to the political judgment of the CM and the ruling party.
In Telangana specifically, SCs are a significant population chunk, around 17 to 18%.
Roughly, yes. And political mobilization by SC groups has been strong, likely playing a role in this expansion's focus. The state also has specific SC welfare schemes, like the TSSC subplan, scholarships, etc.
How does this cabinet expansion connect to Maine's prep? What governance and political issues does it highlight?
Well, delays in cabinet formation or expansion, like 18 months here, can sometimes create perceptions of governance uncertainty. There's the persistent challenge of ensuring adequate representation for marginalized groups in top executive posts. CMs often use cabinet composition to manage intra-party factions, reward loyalty that creates dynamics. And there's always that balancing act: political representation versus administrative capacity and expertise in ministerial appointments.
What about the impacts of these decisions?
Politically, state-level actions like this, focusing on inclusive cabinets, can strengthen federalism by showing how states handle representation internally. Socially, increasing representation can enhance trust and inclusion among marginalized communities. From a governance perspective, a more representative cabinet, if effective, could lead to policies more sensitive to diverse community needs.
What's a desirable way forward in approaching cabinet formation?
One could argue for more transparent criteria for ministerial appointments, maybe balancing representation, experience, expertise. The focus should move beyond just tokenism towards genuinely inclusive governance, where ministers from diverse backgrounds have real influence. Parties need to proactively develop leadership pipelines for marginalized communities. Timely cabinet formation avoids governance delay perceptions, and encouraging public debate on the quality and effectiveness of representation in the executive is healthy for democracy.
Okay, let's move to urban governance challenges now, focusing on Delhi and recent comments by the Chief Minister on slum demolitions.
Right, urban slums, informal settlements, a widespread reality in Indian cities, characterized by insecure land tenure, lack of basic services like sanitation, clean water, linked closely to rural-urban migration and urban poverty.
There's a legal framework, like the Slum Areas Act, 1956, and in Delhi, DUSIB is the main agency.
Yes, the Delhi Urban Shelter Improvement Board. Importantly, the Supreme Court has recognized the right to housing as part of the right to life under Article 21. This has major implications for evictions.
And there are specific guidelines.
Yes, notably the 2010 Delhi High Court guidelines stating no eviction without proper rehabilitation. Plus, nationally, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, PMAY Urban, aims to provide housing for the urban poor, including eligible slum dwellers.
So the news is Delhi's CM Arvind Kejriwal publicly criticized recent slum demolition drives in the city.
He alleged they were done without following due process and, crucially, without providing adequate rehabilitation as per policies and guidelines. The slum dwellers themselves have been protesting, demanding secure tenure, protection under PMA.
And the Delhi government's stance is clear.
They reiterated the need for any eviction process to be court-monitored, humane, and include a proper rehabilitation plan. Politically, this issue carries significant weight in Delhi with its large slum population, especially ahead of local elections.
There are multiple government interventions at play here, aren't there?
Yes, nationally, besides PMAYU for housing, there's the National Urban Livelihoods Mission, NULM, for skills and livelihood support. The Smart Cities Mission also has affordable housing components.
And Delhi's specific initiatives.
The Jahan Jagi Wahan Malkan policy, promoting in-situ slum redevelopment, building houses near the existing slum. DUSIB is involved in surveys for beneficiaries.
And the judiciary's role has been critical.
Absolutely. Landmark judgments like Olga Tellis v. BMC, 1985, established right to livelihood and housing as part of right to life, affirming due process, including potential rehabilitation, must precede evictions.
How does this urban governance issue connect to Maine's prep? What are the key challenges?
It highlights that fundamental conflict: urban development goals versus the housing rights and livelihoods of the urban poor. There's a big gap between rehabilitation policies on paper and effective implementation. Rising gentrification pressures push informal settlements out. Governance fragmentation, multiple agencies with overlapping mandates, complicates action.
And the impacts of this conflict.
Socially, displacement leads to loss of livelihoods, disrupts kids' education, worsens urban poverty. Politically, slum rehabilitation is often highly politicized. Economically, informal workers lose vital proximity to work when displaced. Ethically, it's that classic tension: city beautification versus inclusive urbanization accommodating everyone, including the informal economy backbone.
So what's a potential way forward for this complex urban challenge?
Strict adherence to court-mandated eviction procedures, due process, rehabilitation is non-negotiable. Scaling up in situ rehabilitation like Delhi's policy is essential to minimize displacement. Clear, transparent eligibility criteria for PMA benefits for slum dwellers are needed. Using tech like GIS mapping can help map existing settlements and prevent new, unauthorized ones. Promoting genuinely inclusive urban planning housing plus livelihood linkages. And fostering participatory governance involving residents in redevelopment planning is crucial for sustainable, humane solutions.
Our final topic today brings together climate change and technology adoption. News about increased power usage at EV charging stations in Tamil Nadu linked to climate factors.
Right. Electric vehicles, EVs, are seen as a critical part of India's clean energy transition, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, improving air quality, especially in cities.
But EVs need charging infrastructure.
Exactly. And that infrastructure is connected to the power grid. So as EV adoption grows, electricity demand grows.
What's interesting here is the direct climate link. Higher temperatures mean more AC use, increasing overall grid demand. But this news shows climate can directly impact EV energy consumption, too.
The specific news from Tamil Nadu reported a notable 20% increase in power usage just at EV charging stations.
And it's not just more EVs on the road?
Apparently not entirely. Sources suggest it's growing EV adoption plus climate link factors. Higher heat seems to prompt more people to charge overnight when it's cooler. And interestingly, heat can reduce battery efficiency, meaning they might need charging more frequently.
So state power utilities need to adapt to these new shifting load patterns.
Precisely. It raises broader questions about grid readiness for the EV transition, especially as climate impacts become more pronounced.
Government has been pushing EVs nationally, right? FAME 2 and MP.
Yes, FAME 2 for incentives on EVs and charging infra. The National Electric Mobility Mission Plan is the overarching policy. Entities like ESL have rolled out public charging infra.
And Tamil Nadu is a big player in the EV space.
Oh, it's one of India's growing EV manufacturing hubs. Its TNEV Policy 2023 is ambitious targets, more charging stations, battery manufacturing incentives, and importantly, focuses on ensuring green energy supply for EVs.
This all fits within India's larger climate goals, like net zero by 2070.
Absolutely. Electric mobility is a key pillar of that strategy.
Okay, for mains prep, what issues and challenges does this Tamil Nadu trend highlight?
One major challenge is managing the rising power demand from EVs, which could strain grids, especially locally. Critically, if the electricity for EVs comes mainly from coal, the environmental benefit is largely negated. So integrating clean energy is key.
And infrastructure gaps.
Lack of adequate charging infra, especially outside big cities, remains a barrier. And this surprising factor, how heat affects battery performance and increases charging frequency, adding unexpected demand.
What about the impacts of this energy shift?
Economically, it boosts new sectors, EV manufacturing, battery tech, charging infra creating jobs, but it challenges discoms to manage new load patterns. Environmentally positive only if linked to renewables, otherwise it just shifts emissions. Politically requires integrated transport energy climate planning. Ethically, equity concerns urban versus rural access, affordability for all income groups.
How can we strategically move forward addressing these interconnected challenges?
Accelerating renewable energy integration into the grid is absolutely crucial for sustainable EV charging. Promoting smart charging time-of-use tariffs, load management systems is essential for grid stability. Investing in battery R&D for heat-resilient, efficient batteries is needed. Mandating or incentivizing green energy sourcing for large public chargers and fleets. Expanding charging infra strategically to Tier 23 cities and highways. And finally, integrating climate adaptation into both EV policies and power grid planning is becoming increasingly important. We've looked at quite a spectrum today. Ethnic conflict, disaster management, administrative procedures, climate impacts playing out across different states, reflecting India's internal diversity and challenges.
And we've also seen India navigating complex global relationships, diplomacy, trade, balancing strategic interests with calls for peace.
Exactly. So if we try to connect these seemingly disparate events, what stands out? Maybe it's how local challenges often reveal deeper national fault lines and sometimes even have global implications. And conversely, how global events directly impact life right here, from energy costs to trade policies.
That constant interplay.
Right. Mastering this interconnectedness, whether it's improving governance responsiveness locally, skillfully balancing international ties, or adapting our infrastructure to a changing climate, that seems to be the defining task. For effective leadership, and for us as informed citizens, understanding these links in India today feels more critical than ever.
That's a powerful way to frame it. We hope this deep dive into the news from June 8th and 9th, 2025 has given you valuable insights for your preparation, helping you connect those dots and understand the bigger picture. Subscribe for daily updates and drop a comment to share your thoughts. Please join the Telegram channel link given in the description to read this news and solve a quiz based on this. Jai Hind.